Today I'm going to be talking about the Design Pack Style Guide. This is something we're working on to solve two major problems. One is just a pet peeve of mine, which is inconsistent style. I find that people will use a theme, but then they'll want more, so they'll use something like Design Packs or another type of page builder. And the problem that happens is that the styles become inconsistent. The fonts might be pretty close, but not exactly, or the buttons might be pretty close, but not exactly. Maybe even just the letter spacings off or little things like that. And I think one of the main differences between a really solid brand identity and something that looks a little bit amateurish is consistent design. And so in part, the style guide is to solve that problem. And in part, the style guide is to allow merchants to do it themselves and also to make it easier. Because one of the things that we've also heard from our customers is that when people are implementing styles, it's really great that Design Packs is so flexible, but the problem is then they have to implement it on every single pack. And the more pages you have, the more packs you're using, it can kind of get tedious after a while. So once you've figured out the style that you want, you probably just want to implement it everywhere. So we're rolling out this style guide and we're starting with the two things that will make the biggest impact on your theme, which is fonts and buttons. And I'm going to show you how easy it can be to do. So if we look at this right now, it looks pretty good. The images are cute. All the information is there, but the styles are inconsistent. The buttons have different border radiuses. The colors are random, and the font is just a font that we chose from the font picker. We don't have the option for custom font. And so we're starting to build out this design style, which will become more robust, but for now, we're starting with these two things. So we're actually just going to do it in the theme editor, which I think is the best choice because another problem is sometimes you don't know where to go to get to where you style things, right? You're looking around, you don't know where everything is. So right now, we're adding it as a section in the theme editor. And right now we come up with the design pack and you can hide it to see how it's affecting your site. If you're done with using it, you can also just hide the whole thing. Then you don't need to see it anymore. But while we're setting up the styles, you can see it here. Okay, so first let's add some buttons. We select the block called buttons and you can see that they show up here in the style guide and they don't have a font selected in the actual theme. They're just pulling the theme fonts. You can see that we have a general button and primary and secondary. Right now, we're just going to be focused on the primary and secondary buttons because that's what is in our theme right now. And you can see that now all of the buttons have taken on the styling, and you can test everything right here too. And we have the hover effect and the shadow. So then when we open up the options, you can see that we have the option for custom font. However, we haven't added a custom font yet. We can add a font size, and that will affect the font size and also show up here. And then we have all of these other options to set. And if we don't set them, then it just defaults to whatever the default would have been. So you don't have to set everything. So if we close this, we can see how these buttons fit in. And these buttons really don't fit in that well with this design or look. So we'll style them up a little bit. So let's look at the buttons. So we set the size to 14. We're keeping the button radius at 7. The line height and letter spacing we'll leave until we have the actual font. I'm going to change, this is the button padding, and you can do anything. You could say just do 30 px and it would take all sides, or you could do the top and bottom as 12 and the sides as 30, or you could do 4 values and they all be different. And we've just chosen to keep this flexible so that it can work with any number of options. The border style, we're keeping it solid, although we don't really have a border. And then let's change the offset. So we're going to do 6px and 6px. And the biggest thing we're going to do to change this is take off the blur. And so now you can see we just have a hard edge. And then also we're going to set this hover offset. So we also set the hover values, which is nice, and have a 0 blur offset again. And I'm also going to change this to be a positive 1. So this is the translate, so it translates 1 pixel, which just gives it a bit of a dynamic feel. So now when we hover it, you can see that it moves down a little bit and the shadow gets slightly smaller. So it goes from 6px to 4px, and then the button itself moves 1px. So it just gives that little sort of hint of movement and like you're pressing a button, which is nice and gives the site a more dynamic feel. And now this style goes a little better, but the color is really not for the primary button. I'm going to leave the label white and change the button to this, and also the hover. And for the hover values, the shadow values, I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. And I'm going to use the same ones on both buttons. And then for the secondary label, I'm going to make it a little bit more brownish. It's still going to be dark, but just take the harsh black edge off. And then I'm going to make it a little closer to the design in terms of color. And now beautiful, look, we have these nice buttons that match a lot better with this design. The input button we're leaving for now. We're going to style those buttons with all the inputs, which will be coming later. But for now, we're just setting the primary, secondary, and general buttons. Now, the next thing that makes a huge difference is fonts. And so first, we're going to need to add custom fonts, and then we can use custom fonts. So to add custom fonts, we're going to add the block custom font. And you can see here that we need a font name and a font URL. And to get the font URL, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Files. And if we don't have them, then you can upload them. And if you do have them, the easiest way to find fonts, I find, is like search and then file type and other. And there might be other things, but fonts are going to be a big part of what you want. So one of the things we're going to use is random 14. So I'm going to copy the link here, go back to the font URL and add it there. And then I'm going to give it the name random 14, and that's how we'll use it. And you can see it shows up, and this is what the font looks like. Now, in order to use it, we're going to go finish the buttons off now. So I'm going to put random 14 here. So now it knows to use it. Now, random 14, it's one of those kind of fonts that only has uppercase. So that's why everything turned into uppercase. And then for the line height, I'm going to set it to 1.2 or maybe even just 1 to keep it. And then the letter spacing, I'm going to set it to 3px. For these labels, because the text is long, it doubles it down. But when we go here, you can see that the letter spacing works quite well here. And if you have more text, then it'll just go down. And that's when we want to worry about the line height. So then maybe here we will go back to 1.2. Yeah, that's a little bit nicer if it wraps. And you can play around with these numbers, which is really nice. And then see, like you could want narrower, but I like 3 for now. For the buttons, very spacious, but nice. And then, so we're going to want some more fonts. So we can click here and click custom font and go back here, and Parisish, that's how I pronounce it. I don't know how it's meant to be pronounced. So I'm going to copy this and then do Paris-ish. Now you can set the font weight or the font styles, but these are also coming from the font itself. So if the fonts don't have those, they're not going to work. Now that we have 2 fonts available, as you can see here, I'm going to select headings. And so the headings, now I can add the custom font here. And you can see that the headings have taken this. Now I'm going to update the size because this font is like a little bit little, as you can see. Different fonts look different sizes. And now when we go back to our styles, you can see now the heading and this small heading is now using the heading font. We're going to do the same thing with a few more fonts. And we're going to set paragraphs to Nugo Sans Light. So I just copied it. So I just type it in here. And then we can set the letter spacing, maybe, and the line height to be 1.2, maybe 1.4. Okay. And you can see here that these blocks will show up here. And the fonts will always show up at the top, but if you're working on something, you can just move it up, and then like we don't need to work on the buttons anymore. So you can move these things around and see how they look, but you'll be able to see everything. So now you can see that we're now working with 3 different custom fonts. And then we can also change the font for small heading text. The small headings are taking the heading font, and the small text is taking the font from the theme. So if we see right here, the new arrivals is from the theme, and this is from the heading. But if you want to be even more specific, you can take this and add this font, and then maybe reduce the heading, the text a little bit, and then letter spacing, so like 2px maybe 1.5px. I'm going to even take this down maybe even a bit smaller, and then line height 1.5. So then you can see the small text here is going to take that font, and also the small titles. And you can see now here, and then also here, you're going to see. And so now we're using 4 different fonts, which is probably too many fonts, maybe. But I just chose these so we could easily see the difference between the fonts, and so it would be quite obvious. So now you can see that these styles change the whole look and feel of the site. And the great thing is, so you can see the style guide here and you can see everything you're working with. But then if you kind of get tired of it or you don't need it anymore, you can just disable this slide out, and now we're working with this. And the other great thing is that when you add a new section, it comes with all the styles. So now all the styles are here. I'll just add in an image. And then when we look at the block, if I add buttons, they're already pre-styled. All the fonts are pre-styled. I can just change the images and boom, everything's beautiful. And then if I add a different block, styles are still there. And so you still have the flexibility of design packs, but now you have like a more consistent styling that just works with everything. If for some reason we decided we didn't want to, or you just want to see what it's like without, you can use this eye to like turn it off. So you just click this, and now we're back to what we originally had. And then you click this on again, and now we're back to the pre-styled, and it's just that easy. And because we're putting this in the header block, these styles will go throughout your whole site.